Hey, greetings everybody. Gleekon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft coming at you. We're starting the 14th chapter of The Demon Soul today. Second book in the War of the Ancients trilogy. And we're just a little past the halfway point. Alright, why don't you stay a while and listen. And there's not my best Deckard Cain impersonation, but hey, let's give him a little love. He just got a new game that technically came out in beta today, although my region was able to download it yesterday. I played around with it a little bit, that Diablo Immortal. Nothing was like blowing me away, but also playing it on my phone is, I could put it on my PC, but that kind of for me defeats the purpose of having it available on the phone. Like I wanted a new phone game. Jury's out. Okay, here we go. The demons met them in earnest just west of Suramar. The new advance halted completely and a deadlock began. The Night Elves could not push the Burning Legion any farther, but neither could their foe regain ground. The warriors of the Burning Legion fought relentlessly, but there was one thing in the Night Elves' favor. They were far more familiar with the landscape than the demons. The region around Suramar was one of rolling hills and rivers. Forest, too, had marked much of the region, but now most of that was scorched or torn asunder. Still, many dead trunks and ruined dwellings dotted the area, and they acted not only as additional landmarks, but also protection. Scouting parties were sent out to discover the exact extent of the demons' lines. One such group consisted of Brox, Ronan, and several members of Jared Shadowsong's company, including the captain himself. The orc and the human had volunteered themselves for this mission, well aware that they understood the ways of the Burning Legion better than anyone. However, Ravencrest had made them swear that, like the rest of the scouts, they would return at an appointed hour and no later. Otherwise, he could not promise that they would be safe should he decide it opportune to strike one flank or another quickly based on whatever the other outriders reported. Night had fallen, but that by itself did not make the going so slow. Simple darkness alone had no effect on any of the party, and in fact would have aided their search. However, a thick foul mist with a dank greenish tinge covered everything. The mist seemed to spread wherever the demons went and left open the threat that monstrous warriors could be lurking only yards away, unnoticed. Slowly, the group numbering a dozen crossed the ruined land. Withered and blackened trees cast eerie shapes in the mist. No amount of squinting could much penetrate the haze. It was perhaps fortunate in one way. So near Suramar, the scouting party crossed through an area where once there had been a settlement. Now and then the remnants of a treehouse could be spotted sprawled on its side, the entire structure ripped out at the roots, then chopped to pieces. All knew that the inhabitants themselves had likely suffered a similar fate. "Barbaric," muttered Jared. Brox grunted. The Night Elves had been very quickly forced to harden themselves to the butchery, but they could scarcely learn to accept it the way the orc could. Brox had grown up around brutality. First the end of the war against the Alliance, then the violent march to the reservations, and lastly the struggle against the Burning Legion and the Scourge. He mourned the dead, yes, but there was little he saw that twisted his gut anymore. In the end, death was death. To the orc's right, Ronan quietly cursed. The spellcaster clamped his hand tight, then thrust his palm into a pouch attached to his belt. He had tried using a scrying stone to survey the area for any hint of demons, but the mist apparently befouled the sensitive magics involved. Brox had his own method for seeking out the enemy. Every few yards he lifted his nose up and sniffed. The smells that mostly assailed his nostrils were pungent and spoke quite succinctly of death. So far, the only demons he noted were foul corpses covered in the ichor that had once flowed through their veins. There were, of course, many other bodies. The mangled remains of night elves littered the settlement, some of them soldiers from the retreat. Sorry, guys. Others hapless civilians who had moved too slow. No victim had been left whole. Arms, legs, even heads had been lopped off. Several corpses appeared to have been cut up afterward, which strengthened the expressions of disgust and bitterness worn by the soldiers in the party. "Stay spread out, but within sight," Jared commanded, tightening the reins of his own lightsaber, "and keep your beasts under control." The last order he had repeated more than once already. The huge panthers seemed particularly distressed about their situation, as if they knew something that their riders did not. It made the scouting party even more tense. A nightmarish shadow rose up before them, the outer edge of Suramar. The Burning Legion had not had sufficient time to ravage the entire city, and so part of its skeleton still stood as a grim reminder of all that had been lost and all that still could be. "By the Mother Moon," whispered one soldier. Brox glanced at Jared. The captain stared at his home with eyes that barely blinked. His hands crumpled, the reins, the vein in his neck throbbed. "Art to have no home," the orc commented to him, thinking of his own life. "I have a home," Jared growled. "Suramar is still my home." The orc said nothing more, understanding the night elf's pain. Through the fallen gates they entered the city. Utter silence surrounded them. Even their breathing seemed far too raucous a noise for this still place. Once inside, they paused. Jared looked to the wizard for a suggestion as to their next move. Ahead of them, the path split in 3 directions. Safety demanded that they all stay together, but the time limit set to them made inspecting Suramar that way impossible. Ronan frowned, finally saying, "No one goes wandering off in this. There's a magic in the mist. I don't care if we can't search everything, Captain." "I'm inclined to agree," Jared returned with some relief. "I never thought to be so distrusting of a place in which I grew up." "This is no longer Suramar, Shadowsong. You must remember that. Whatever the Burning Legion touches, it taints. Even if the city is empty of demons, it could be very, very dangerous." Brox nodded. He recalled all too well the things that had come out at him from the midst during his people's fight against the demons. What the Night Elves had battled so far proved pale by comparison. Just enough of the city remained intact to give the ruins a semblance of their former self. Now and then a building would materialize that had not been touched. Jared had soldiers check these structures out, thinking that anyone who had survived the carnage might have taken refuge inside. Not once did they find a living soul, though. In spite of their intention to stay together, the devastation eventually demanded otherwise of them. The path became too confused and debris-filled to allow the scouting party to ride together without vastly slowing the search down. With great reluctance, Jared had 3 soldiers on each end head off toward the side streets. "Go around the wreckage and meet up with us as soon as your route allows," he told the 6. As the 2 groups rode off, the captain quickly added, "And keep together." With Shadowsong and his remaining 3 fighters creating an escort for Ronan and Brox by association, the main group moved on. The Night Sabers had to pick their way up and over the rubble. 3 huge tree homes had been torn down and in the process collided with one another over the path. One leaned atop the other 2, the former residents dangling menacingly over the orc and his companions. Brox's Night Saber hissed as it stepped on something. Ronan leaned over, then informed the orc, "The owner never left." They found more corpses as the cats reached the highest point. Again, they were residents of the city, but these had evidently tried to flee when they were caught by the Burning Legion. Other than the grotesque wounds left by their slayers, the victims were oddly untouched. Neither decay nor carrion eaters had disturbed them. They had to have perished in the initial destruction, the wizard noted. "You'd think they'd look even worse." "'Tis a foul enough sight for me already," Jared Shadowsong gasped. With the panthers moving as gingerly as possible, they finally began descending to the original path. As he held on tight, Brox again raised his nose to the air and sniffed. For a brief moment, the orc thought he sensed something, but the scent was faint and old. He looked around and discovered the body of a fell beast that some soldier had speared. Brox grunted in satisfaction and resumed clinging on for dear life. Finally, the 6 reached level ground. Jared pointed ahead, saying, "I recall an avenue just out of sight. We should be able to join up with the others, Master Ronan." "I'll be glad of that." Only a short distance later, the captain's chosen avenue materialized. The party paused when it reached the intersection, and Jared looked around. "We must have gotten ahead of them," he noted. Brox straightened. "Yeah, right. It's obvious that they're not going to make it." It's like horror movie 101. Ronan shifted uneasily in the saddle. Or D&D never split the party. His fingers flexing in what the orc knew was a preamble to spellcasting. "Ah!" Jared looked relieved. "Here comes one party now." From the orc's left rode 3 of the soldiers. They looked very pleased to see their comrades again. Even the cats moved with much eagerness. "What did you find?" Shadowsong asked the new arrivals. "Nothing, Captain," responded the most senior in rank. "More ruins, more corpses, as many of our people as those monsters." "Damn." "Are several of those you knew not among the refugees with us?" Shadowsong asked Ronan. "Far too many. And the more we find here, the less chance that I've just missed them in the crowds." It was an old tale to Brox. How many of those with whom he had grown up had died in one battle or another? Small wonder that he had once regretted outlasting his comrades in the war. By then, the orc had already survived most of his blood brothers. He realized that part of his desire to die had also been due to loneliness. Jared eyed the opposite direction. "The others should be here at any moment." But that moment and 100 others came and went, and still the missing soldiers did not reappear. The riders grew tense. Their darkening moods spread to the Night Sabers, who hissed and spat more and more as the minutes passed. Brox could finally wait no longer. Even as Captain Shadowsong began to raise his hand in order to suggest that they move out and look for the vanished soldiers, the orc rode past him, toward where the last trio should have been. He steered his mount down the other pathway, searching warily for any sign. Far behind him, Ronan and the Night Elves hurried to catch up. My dog knows where the treats are. He's like stalking them. Rubble filled the street. Torn cloth and old bloodstains added the only color to the scene. The orc readied his axe and forced his mount to continue on. Then a peculiarity about his present surroundings struck Brox. He twisted in the saddle, carefully looking around for one hint that his suspicions were correct. But nowhere did he see any sign of even a single body. No night elves, no demons. Even the likely corpses of the 3 missing soldiers and their mounts could not be found. What had happened to them, Brox wondered. How had this street remained unsullied by the deaths of innocents? The slight sliding of rocks caused the green-skinned warrior to jerk to his right. A figure slowly coalesced in the mist. A soldier, but on foot with his weapon drawn. "Where's your mount?" the orc rumbled. The soldier trod awkwardly toward him. There were splotches on his armor and his mouth hung open. As his face came into better view, Brock saw with consternation that part of it had been ripped open. One eye was completely gone, and the jagged gap descended all the way to the center of the throat, or what remained of it. And as he neared the orc, the macabre figure raised his weapon. Behind him, Brock suddenly noted other shapes following the soldier. Although no coward, the green-skinned fighter pulled hard on the reins, turning the lightsaber about. As it moved, the cat swung one clawed paw at the oncoming soldier, batting him away like a toy. The others rode up just as he started back. Jared glanced beyond him to where the soldier had fallen. "What did you do to him? You made your beast strike him dead." "Already dead before. Hurry! More coming!" The Night Elf started to argue, but Ronan put a hand across his chest. "Look into the mist, Shadow Song. Look!" Jared did, and shook his head in horror. The soldier arose, his face and chest now even more terrible to behold. Still wobbling, he gripped his sword and headed toward the party. Behind him, the first of the other shapes grew distinct, night elves, but in even more monstrous shape than the soldier. Several were ripped open from head to toe, and others missed limbs. All wore the same empty expressions and moved with the same deathly determination. "Ride!" the captain shouted. "Back to the city gate! Follow me!" With Jared and the wizard in the lead, the party pulled away just before the first of the ghoulish figures could reach them. They sped up the way that they had just come, but when they reached the intersection, Jared had everyone turn in the opposite direction. "Why this way?" shouted Ronan. "A short and smoother path to our goal, I hope." But as they rode, other figures began to emerge from the ruins. Brox growled as what had once been an elder female in the blood-encrusted remains of a once glittering silver, turquoise, and red gown snatched almost hungrily at his leg. He kicked her back and for good measure severed her head with one mighty swing of the enchanted axe. Even after that, her body grabbed wildly for anything it could reach, but fortunately by then the orc had ridden away. I don't know the way that necromancy works. I guess it did exist in some form. I feel like it was briefly mentioned in Chronicles. I know that the warlocks can raise the dead by the time of orcs and humans, so I guess the magic does exist. So I guess maybe it's not that weird. Ronan suddenly pulled up short. "Watch out!" His warning came too late for one of the soldiers nearest him. A mass of clawing, tearing hands pulled the Night Elf off his mount. He slashed one with his sword, but he might as well have been stabbing the air for all the good it did. Jared started to come to his aid, but before he could reach his comrade, the helpless victim vanished beneath the shambling corpses. His scream cut off almost immediately. "It's too late for him," the wizard insisted, despite Jared's clear intention of still trying to retrieve the soldier. "The rest of you keep riding. I've some notion what to do here." "We can't leave you," argued the captain. Brock steered his mount next to Ronan. "I stay with him." "We'll only be a few moments behind Shadow Song. The way looks clear a little after this. You should be able to get out of the city." The Night Elf did not want to leave, but to stay would risk more lives. Of them all, Ronan had the best chance for survival. "This way," the captain called to the rest of his command. As they pushed off, the riderless lightsaber behind, Ronan turned to face the oncoming mob. "Brox, I need a few seconds." Nodding, the orc pushed forward. With a battle cry, he slashed back and forth, his axe sweeping out before his mount with deadly accuracy. Grasping hands, gore-encrusted chests, torn throats, all he chopped at with every iota of strength that he could muster. Just as Brox began to flag, Ronan called, "Enough! Pull back!" No sooner had the orc done so than the wizard tossed a small vial at the encroaching horde. As it flew, it somehow managed to arc along the front rows, splattering each of the undead. And the moment the spilling liquid touched its targets, the ghouls burst into blue flame. An inferno quickly blossomed. The corpses behind the first row walked mindlessly into the flames, igniting themselves. Some of those already ablaze teetered into others, spreading the fire to them. Something I once used against the Scourge, the human remarked with grim satisfaction. Come on, we've got it. A fiery figure rushed forward and collapsed into Brox's mount, setting it too ablaze. The orc struggled as the lightsaber abruptly turned and raced madly away from the source of its agony, in the process, dragging its rider deeper into Suramar. Ronan called out after him, but Brox could not stop his animal. Crazed by the smoldering flames, the panther charged wildly through the streets. The orc tried to smother the fire, but only made his situation worse. His lightsaber suddenly slowed, then threw itself on the side that burned. Brox barely had time to fling himself to safety, lest his leg be crushed under the beast's immense weight. The lightsaber rolled over on the affected area, then, seeming unsatisfied with his attempts, ran off before the orc could stop it. Brox whirled around, expecting to be attacked on all sides by the horrific mob. Breath coming out in heavy pants, he swung his axe again and again, only gradually realizing that he was not in any imminent danger. Of course, he was also without either a mount or the presence of the wizard. Eyes wary, Brock started back the way from which he thought the lightsaber had come. Yet, as the brawny fighter proceeded through the ruins, he saw nothing that gave any hint as to whether his path was the right one. The injured cat had run with such manic swiftness that it had clearly dragged its rider farther than first imagined. The orc smelled the air, but caught no scent of either the human or the night elves. Worse, his usually infallible sense of direction failed him here. The mist had a headiness to it that played with all of his senses. Growing more confused as to his whereabouts, Brox turned down what seemed a vaguely familiar avenue. Ruined trees, scorched landscape, and the crumbling remains of the dwellings appeared out of the haze, but none did he recognize with any certainty. Then something momentarily assailed his nose. The hulking orc hesitated, sniffing the air again. His heavy brow crushed together, and he ground his yellowed teeth. With new resolve, he headed to his right, every other step smelling the air again. His new path demanded that he climb over the tangling roots of an upturned giant oak and across the crushed shell of a night elven home, but Brox would not be deterred. He climbed cautiously, trying not to make the slightest sound, a difficult task considering that he also refused to free his other hand by putting away his axe. As he reached the top of the shattered domicile, Brox caught a fresh scent. It made his nostrils wrinkle in disgust, but urged him forward, and when he peered over, it was to see the demons at work. There were 4 of the Felguard and 1 Doomguard soldier as well. However, they were not so much of a threat in Brox's eyes as the 2 standing in the forefront. The orc snarled as he recognized from his own time the horrific winged figures in midnight blue armor. They gestured with fingers that ended in savage blade-like nails, a pale green aura covering their hands as they worked. Nathrazim, also called Dreadlords. And those are not... I don't think they're part of the Burning Legion. I think they serve the old ones. As we know from Shadowlands, they are the masterminds behind everything. They stood taller than the other demons, and their aspects were more terrible to behold. Huge, dark, curled horns thrust high from their heads. They had dead gray skin like a corpse, and no hair whatsoever on their monstrous heads. 2 sharp canines jutted down, reminding Brox of the tales he had heard of the Dreadlord's vampiric traits. In point of fact, the Nathrazim were psychic vampires, feeding on the weak-minded and often using their victims as slaves. The pair stood on thick, powerful legs like those of goats, their feet cloven hooves. While cunning and extremely skilled at magic, even more so than the Eridar, they were also deadly fighters. Yet it seemed that in this particular incident, it was their dark spells that the orc and his companion had to fear most. Brox had found the necromancers. The 2 Nathrazim had done the abominable successfully raising the dead they and their comrades had so brutally slaughtered. The orc recalled what he had heard of the undead scourge and their own ghoulish spells. To one of his kind, what these creatures did now was far more monstrous than any death caused by the weapons of the Felguard of Doomguard. And yet the orcs are the ones that bring that to Azeroth in the first place, I think, with their warlocks. I don't know if you think about orcs and humans. In his mind, Brox imagined what he would have felt like if the bloody bodies of his comrades had risen up to join the enemy against the orcs. This was sacrilege, a dishonoring of spirits. His heart pounded, and Brox felt an uncontrollable rage filling him. He suddenly thought of Ronan and the Night Elves. It was possible that they had escaped it with so many dead under the control of the Nathrazim. It was also possible that they fought dearly for their lives, provided they had not already been slain, and if slain, they would likely join those the Dreadlords had raised. Brox could hold back no longer. He rose from his hiding place, and with a war cry akin to the one he had uttered with his comrades back at the pass, leapt upon the group. His shout echoed through the stillness. To his immense pleasure, the demons actually jumped at the sound so unexpected in this place. Their surprise slowed their reflexes exactly as the warrior had planned. The axe Malfurion and the demigod had created for him cut smoothly through the armored chest of the first Felguard, spilling the demon's foul innards. I wonder what the difference is when axe is spelled with and without an E. I think it's weird without one. As his first foe collapsed, Brox brought the axe up, and I don't think we did that before, honestly, like the other chapters. This is weird. Slicing through the forearm of another creature. I think I would have noticed. The Dreadlords did not cease their work relying on their comrades to deal with one attacker. However, they had not fought orcs. Not yet. And that lack of understanding worked well for Brox. He slammed into the next nearest Felguard, bowling over the huge demon with his own considerable mass, then rolled away as the Doomguard soldier attempted to run him through. Brox traded blows with the winged warrior, then whirled just in time to deflect a strike by another opponent. He cleaved the second demon in half at the waist, and for good measure used the back end of his war axe to crush in the skull of the fighter that he had maimed earlier. Now one of the spellcasters at last took notice. Leaving his comrade to continue their foul work, he turned and pointed at the orc. In desperation, Brox threw himself between the spellcaster and the Doomguard. Yet no sooner had he done that than the winged figure shrieked and twisted. He contorted as if something sought to burrow out of him, and then his chest exploded. Something struck the orc from behind. Brox felt dazed. The last of the Felguard loomed over him, the Nathrezim coming up next to the monstrous warrior. The fiendish spellcaster stared down at their adversary, demonic eyes gleeful. "You will fight well for us," he hissed. "Kill many of your friends." The vision of himself shambling toward Tyrande and the others sickened Brox. He had been willing to accept death, but this was a terrible parody of it. "No!" Brox pushed himself up, knowing full well that he would never beat either the Felguard's weapon or the Nathrezim's unholy spell. Then the other Nathrezim unexpectedly howled. The agonizing cry barely escaped his mouth before he burst into blue flames. The two demons turned, giving Brox his chance. He immediately went for the remaining spellcaster, thrusting up the axe. The sharp blade not only cut through the Nathrezim's throat, but also completely severed the head. A blade came at his side, cutting a streak along the orc's torso. Brox grunted with pain, then turned to face his adversary. His axe met the demon's blade, shattering the other weapon. The Felguard tried to retreat, but the orc cut him down. Breathing heavily, the veteran warrior looked around. From the wreckage of another downed tree, Ronan led his own lightsaber forward. "I thought you might be able to handle the situation if I provided a little diversion." The wizard studied the bodies. "If I needn't have bothered at all, please tell me." With a snort, Brox replied, "A good warrior welcomes all allies, human. This one thanks you." "I should thank you. You found the ones animating the dead. It was like the horror of the scourge all over again." Thinking of the shambling corpses, Brox quickly surveyed the area again, but saw nothing. "Rest it easy, Brox," Ronan assured him. "When the Nathrezim perished, I sensed their work cease. The dead are at rest again." "Good. You're wounded." The orc gave a non-committal grunt. "Had many wounds." Ronan grinned. "Well, for now you'll be riding. Jared and the others should be just outside the gate. I doubt the erstwhile captain will go far without us. He's already lost Krasis and Malfurion. He doesn't want to go back to Ravencrest empty-handed." Most other times Brox would have argued about accepting a ride. To show anything but the utmost strength to another was considered shameful in the eyes of his people. Still, he felt weak in the legs and decided that a good warrior also did not unnecessarily risk those who had come to his aid. The orc mounted the lightsaber and allowed Ronan to guide it. "It's beginning," muttered the human. "They're starting to experiment with creating an army of the unliving. This is probably not the only place that they've been attempting this." The thick mist made their going slow. Brox, peering about, saw the body of a dead night elf, one of the original inhabitants by the look of the garments. That it lay unmoving gave the orc a conflicting feeling of relief and distaste. "You understand what I'm saying, don't you, Brox?" The orc did. Anyone who had survived the final war against the Burning Legion and lived through the awful aftermath would have understood. No one in their time period had not at the very least heard the horror stories, the tales of the plague lands and the ghoulish hordes wandering it. Too many more had experienced their own loved ones rising up from the dead and trying to add the living to their grisly ranks. The scourge now stalked the world, spreading terror as they attempted to make of it one vast plague land. Quel'Thalas was all but gone, most of Lordaeron too. The undead haunted nearly every realm. Here in the far past, Brox and Ronan had just come across the first inklings of the scourge's creation, and both knew that despite this small victory, there was nothing they could do to change that terrifying part of the future. Yeah. I think the best thing that you can just do is embrace it. And we just saw, I think the achievement's Champion of Lordaeron or something like that. But with this latest patch, as we're transitioning, they gave you a little storyline of Sylvan. Actually, it's not Sylvanas, but of Minithil, and a few other people. Basically, I missed this part of these two when it happened. I think it happened at the beginning of BFA or something, or the end of Legion. But the Undercity was like destroyed basically, and now, and if you played it, they're starting to clear it out. They basically opened the way for the Undercity to become habitable again, which is good. I always kind of liked it, and I bet they're going to do something similar where they try to regrow Teldrassil and let the Night Elves land also join that. All right, so on top of everything else, we're also seeing the beginnings of the undead. I feel like this author, I mean, it's neat, but this guy is just pulling from everything. He's like, if I'm going to write the oldest chronologically like story in all of the Warcraft novels, I'm going to be like putting my fingers in every single pie. I'm going to claim the origins. I'm going to write the origin story for like everything. For Deathwing, for goblins, for the gnomes. I mean, not the gnomes, the undead. Whatever, I guess. No one's stopping him. All right, guys, another episode in Pipes 5x5. I will see you on the next one. Thanks for listening to Lore of Warcraft.